Hello, everyone. This is Anand here from Team Boards. I hope you are enjoying all of your JiraCon sessions so far. And I believe this one is probably the last slot that we have before the closing session from Patrick. Welcome again. Today, we are going to talk about raising the bar for employee success within the context of Jira. Now, obviously, I've tried and kept this session a little less technical as compared to other sessions that have been going around. So let's begin. Like I said, I'm a CEO and product owner here at Boards, and let's jump right in. Traditional performance management is broken. And I know you have heard this cliched phrase a number of times, right? But we have reason to believe that this is the truth. Why so? First, gone are the days when employees were happy and satisfied when they were handed the annual ratings along with the salary increments or salary revisions, right? Already we are talking this in the backdrop of great resignation, right? In fact, nowadays, the individuals, especially the millennials, are looking to improve themselves continuously with the help of real-time feedback. And that is where the agile performance management comes in. Now, what is this agile performance management that's making buzz for quite some time in the market? Just give me a second. Let me grab some water. All right. So traditionally, the feedback has always been exchanged annually. When I say traditionally, that still applies for a lot of larger organizations, the global giants that are sitting on top of these processes with a lot of inertia. Whereas, as opposed to that traditional philosophy, when it comes to agility, you're talking about exchanging that feedback on a more frequent basis. When it comes to goals, traditionally, they have always been set at the beginning of the year, and majority of the times, as many of you have experienced in corporate jobs, they are not even looked at unless it is the time of annual appraisals. Look at it from the agile perspective, and that's completely opposite. When it comes to the agile performance management, the goals are meant to be collaborative and flexible. When it comes to flexibility, it's not only about having quarterly goals as opposed to annual goals. It's also about abandoning the goals midway if it does not make sense to pursue them anymore. Traditional approach has always been about dictating. The people at the top would use to set up the strategy, tactics, and almost dictate the day-to-day execution. But when it comes to the agile performance management, it's more about collaboration. And I'm sure you must have looked at that very famous post that rotates on LinkedIn every now and then, that becomes viral every now and then. So collaboration is the key when it comes to agile performance management. And finally, you're not only talking about delivering a project, you are looking at the performance management more from a growth point of view. Now, keeping this context in mind, let's move on and look at these perspectives in more detail. First of all, why do we think that Jira is the most appropriate place for doing the agile performance management? Obviously, one very important factor that plays into this is the data that Jira has, right? If you are a team that is heavily into Jira and Atlassian ecosystem, you know that Jira is basically your treasure trove, right? You cannot miss the context when you are working within Jira. That's why If you are heavily invested in the Atlassian ecosystem, then there is no better alternative for doing the agile performance management implementation. More importantly, there is no separate system for your team to learn or implement. You're already inside of Jira, so you just have to use the existing system, and the adoption scales extremely rapidly. And then finally, connecting execution with strategy, right? Now, what I mean by that is, majority of the times, 70-80% of your organization is going to utilize their Jira for day-to-day, month-to-month project management, task management. That's your execution, right? But when it comes to strategy, typically the tools for maintaining your strategy remain spreadsheets, presentations, and the other documents that are not even accessible to the frontline contributors. And that's why we think it makes double sense to do agile performance management within Jira, because everyone, that 80% of your organization is already heavily reliant on Jira. And that's how you connect your day-to-day execution, your day-to-day projects and deliveries with short-term and long-term strategic objectives. Now, when it comes to agile performance management, there are three core components to it. One is continuous feedback. Second is objectives and key results, which is nothing but a goal setting methodology. And then you have review forms. Let's look at these one by one. Now, we call this continuous feedback, not just feedback, right? There is an important backdrop to this word, continuous. The intention is to help all the individuals in your team to connect with each other whenever they need, without any official nudges or formal nudges. So however tiny or large the task is that's getting performed, a job well done is always going to deserve the kudos. So why not do it within the context of your day-to-day tasks? And don't only look at it from the point of view of kudos, right? Kudos sounds more positive. There is also the perspective of coaching someone. Obviously, there are going to be individuals, or rather, there are going to be tasks that may not end up delivering what your expectations were. Obviously, you can utilize that opportunity to coach the relevant individual to help them understand the specifics where they can improve further, right? That's where the real power of agile continuous feedback comes in. You are trying to exchange feedback with different individuals based on their day-to-day activity. Obviously, we'll talk about this in a bit more detail down the line, but do keep in mind the importance of continuous work. Now, before I move on to the next slide, I have a very simple exercise for you. Now, you can do it while you're still here, but at the same time, I'll strongly recommend, right? If you are a manager, get all of your team members in a conference room. If you are someone from the executive team, get all of your department heads in the conference room and ask them the question that goes on these lines. When was the last time they received feedback from their direct manager or peers? Right? Now I'm saying feedback, not necessarily positive or negative feedback, any kind of feedback. And it will surprise you, 7 out of 10 times, you'll hear that the individuals involved have not received feedback from their direct manager or peers since the last performance appraisal happened, right? That's the state of affairs that we are dealing with. Let's move on. We'll talk about this in a bit more detail. The next component is, the next module is objectives and key results, which is a goal setting methodology, right? And nowadays it's kind of a buzzword because a lot of uber successful startups have talked about OKRs, especially it started from Google, right? So Google adopted OKRs right since it was a team of 40 nerds. But the most important thing about OKRs, keeping aside the buzz, is aligning efforts of everyone involved, right from the frontline contributors, and letting them see what the bigger picture is, right? How their day-to-day efforts are helping the team achieve the larger goals, and how the team level goals, how the team level initiatives are really playing into the top priorities of the organization. Again, I have another exercise for you. Do notice this time around, the question is a bit different. What we are saying is get everyone in a room and ask them to write down the highest priority for your organization in the ongoing quarter, right? This is important. Writing it down is extremely important. Otherwise, people would end up changing their answers when they are asked, right? What will happen invariably is almost everyone will end up writing down priorities based on their own understanding, right? What that does is it clearly calls out the need for aligning everyone's understanding, everyone's efforts. That's why the OKRs play an important part in setting up the entire organization for success. Next one, review forms. Now, this is kind of a more traditional form of performance appraisals, which we still include in the agile performance management context, because we don't think you have to completely give up the existing practices. We want best of both the worlds. That's why we think context is the king. You need a systematic approach that takes into account every effort, every task that the individual has performed, and doesn't let you fall prey to all of those cognitive biases such as recency bias, first impression bias, and so on, right? You would want to assess someone's performance based on their overall efforts and not just maybe one or two things that they did a good job at or maybe a bad job at. Third and the final exercise that I'd be happy if you undertook in your own HR and productivity teams, ask them how much the entire organization invests in the current performance appraisal process. That usually happens at the end of the year, or in some organizations at the semi-annual frequency. Again, it will amaze you to hear the ROI that's there for this current process. It's abysmally low. And that is why there is a need for agile performance management. Let's move on. Now let's look into these components, these modules in a bit more detail. First, let's talk about continuous feedback. Now, purpose of continuous feedback. It is supposed to be unstructured and quick, right? It could be a quick note of thanks, a quick note of praise, or even an area of improvement. It doesn't have to be structured, elaborate, too detailed. It can be as short as 3-4 lines, nothing beyond that. It could even be written in the form of few bullets. That's about it. And the most important part probably is that it doesn't have to wait until the formal performance appraisal kicks in, right? It can be triggered by any individual. Doesn't have to be someone from the HR team or the programs management team. Or it can even be triggered by individuals' own request for feedback about their own performance. And it should relate to the context, right? This continuous feedback can relate to the day-to-day project-related activities or the OKRs that the individual or the teams are working on. And a vital input on this one is this feedback, since it's not triggered by the official performance appraisal processes, it's ideally supposed to be development oriented than just backward looking or appraisal specific, right? What I mean by that is, while you can definitely criticize, probably criticize is not the right word, while you can definitely coach individuals if their performance is not up to your expectations, the idea is still to help them succeed, to help them improve. That's why the word constructive. Now, within the case of UpRaise app, let's see how that pans out. Here you'll see this is a screenshot of continuous feedback that one can exchange within the app. I've highlighted 3 important segments on this. First one is Jira task, the one at the top. Then you have values, and then you have a tag. So what that means, this is contextual feedback. If you observed, I've been stressing right from the beginning the importance of context. So this Jira task is nothing but the context for this discussion, the context for this feedback. So UpRaise lets you associate these feedback messages, whether positive, negative, constructive, and I hope you guys won't give destructive feedback. But the idea is to have this feedback associated with Jira issues. Now, obviously, that's not a mandatory option. You can still go ahead and provide generic feedback. But if you did associate with a Jira task or with an objective, you'll definitely end up with the desired results, the desired outcomes, because you're trying to be extremely specific with your praise or with your coaching. Second part is values. On the screen, you'll see the values of commitment and enthusiasm. Again, this just adds the broader perspective to the day-to-day task that was being performed. So just try and visualize how a mundane day-to-day tasks is being turned into something that's much more broader and much more bigger picture in the sense. These values could be anything that are specific to your team, that are specific to your company. That's totally up to you. And finally, you have this tag right now, which is displayed as the fantastic work. Depending on what your cultural threads are, you can customize this on your own. You can have it, for example, we have seen companies utilize the metal badges, right? Gold, silver, and bronze medals as tags. There are some organizations which prefer plain numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's completely up to you what makes sense for your cultural fabric. We'll talk about this in a bit more detail. For now, let's move on to the OKRs part. Now, purpose of OKRs. Obviously, this is going to be a bit repetitive. I'm sure you've heard the SMART phrase n number of times, but in the next slide, I'll also help you understand how that actually works in the context of agile performance management, as well as in the context of Jira itself. Now, just for the sake of this discussion, I'll repeat the acronym SMART: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Set and forget, the problem that I initially talked about, right? At the beginning of the year, users, their direct managers will sit across and set up the goals. But invariably, what happens? Nobody looks at the goals until it is time of the performance appraisals. So we want the teams, the companies to move away from this set and forget mindset. through OKRs, we want them to track their goals frequently and set them up on a quarterly basis rather than on an annual or semi-annual basis. And that definitely makes sense within the context of the rapid pace of growth, rapid pace of changes that are going around us, especially within the context of COVID as well. The third area of purpose is alignment, right? How do you end up ensuring that everyone is rowing in the same direction? The individual goals should align with team and company level goals. There definitely has to be alignment if the organization as a whole wants to make progress. If you haven't decided your North Star to the departments, to the teams, and to the frontline contributors, that alignment part is going to become difficult. And that's where the framework of OKRs plays a bigger role. Another aspect, transparency. Now, if you go by the book, if you go by all the material that's out there regarding OKRs, you'll see that OKRs are meant to be public. The reason being, setting up these goals, these OKRs as public, ensures that there is sufficient transparency in any high growth organization. Otherwise, it would be too difficult for any head of department to understand what someone else who is a head of another department is working on, right? Having said that, with all practicality, we have seen some large fast growth organizations set up their goals with restricted visibility. Again, OKRs is a framework, it's not a mandate. We have seen a number of OKR flavors. For example, you must have heard about Spotify's squad framework for OKRs. So there are such bunch of different flavors for OKRs out there. But the most important part, ensuring that there is maximum transparency across the entire organization. You don't want to be setting up the goals traditional way, where the goal is only visible and accessible to the team member and their direct manager. No one else can know what they are working on, what their targets are. No, transparency is a key aspect of adopting the OKR framework. And then finally, since we are talking about Jira here, we are going to talk about the connectivity. Now, typically, there are SaaS applications out there that allow you to create objectives and key results of different types. But since we are doing this within the scope of Jira, what can happen is you can connect Jira issues as key results. Now, there are two schools of thoughts surrounding this. There is one school of thought that says Jira issues or Jira tickets are essentially tasks and they should not be connected as key results to objectives. And the second school of thought says that's not necessarily the case. In some special scenarios, it definitely makes sense to connect Jira issues as key results. We won't be a judge here. It's totally up to you whether it is acceptable to connect Jira issues as key results. Irrespective of that, UpRaise lets you connect Jira issues as key results as well as key result actions. Now, what that does is, since Jira issues are going to get updated in terms of their statuses, assignees, all of that data is automatically sent back to UpRaise, since UpRaise is a Jira app, and the progress updates happen on an automatic basis. So this is within the context of connecting your day-to-day execution with your strategy as well as short and mid-term goals. So your UpRaise objectives are going to be your goals, short-term, mid-term objectives. And these Jira issues will act as part of your execution. And whenever you execute something, whenever the Jira issue changes its state, it automatically impacts the higher level objective. We'll talk about that in the next slide, I guess, the one after this. Let us first understand the idea of OKRs. What are OKRs? Now, if you're looking at my screen, one thing that I'm quite confident you would have seen before in your corporate jobs is a goal, something similar to this, learning and development goal. So we see this happen a lot of times. Individuals are assigned goals which essentially say learning and development. Now, in no world, it is possible to measure a goal that goes by the title learning and development, right? You can never tell whether you have made any progress, whether you have achieved the goal or you have failed to achieve the goal. That is where OKRs come in. The goal itself still remains learning and development, but you're trying to make it measurable without ambiguity with the help of key results, right? For example, in the screenshot that's out there, it says learning and development is the goal that I'm working towards. But for me to achieve that goal completely, I'm supposed to, sorry, I'll just go back. Right. I'm supposed to complete these key results, right? So these are numerical key results, measurable key results. There is no way any kind of ambiguity could be introduced in this. These are metric types of key results, but it is definitely still possible to insert Jira issues as key results, even Jira epics as key results. And whenever that progress happens, which is again measurable, falls back onto the progress of parent objective. So this is a very neat way, objectives and key results, to ensure that your people, that your team, that your company is setting up goals that are measurable, that are not out there just for the sake of your process. This talks about the alignment part. If you look at the screenshot, there are 3 levels of objectives: company objective, team objective, individual objective. And this is the alignment that is going to help everyone, every frontline contributor, see how their efforts are playing out to help teams and the entire company achieve the desired outcomes. Now, although this screenshot only depicts 3 levels of goals, company, team, individual, UpRaise definitely makes it possible to create multiple levels in between. For example, we have seen organizations create department level goals, squad level goals, division level goals, whatever makes sense, whatever structure makes sense for the organization, right? So you can have as many layers in between as your processes warrant. And the third component that's part of the agile performance management philosophy is the traditional review forms. Let's first understand what's the purpose of forms, how they are different from the continuous feedback. Now understand first things. Forms is still a variation of feedback, right? Although this one is not continuous. It's meant to be a thought through feedback where there is structure to the discussion and it is equally backward and forward looking. You're not only helping the individual look forward and improve, but at the same time, assess or rate performance looking backwards. This is detailed, elaborate, and actionable that helps the individual improve in the longer run. And majority of the times from our experience, this is periodic feedback. It happens every 6 months or every year. we have come across very few organizations that conduct this kind of traditional feedback every quarter or so. But the important part here is this process is going to last a few days or a few weeks, depending on size of the organization as well as the complexity of your process. Within the scope of UpRaise, primary use case for firms is doing performance reviews or performance appraisals, as you call them. There are a bunch of different base templates, as we call them. We'll talk about them in a few moments. There are a bunch of these templates that help you conduct different kinds of reviews, be it traditional team member and manager feedback, or upwards looking feedback, 360 feedback, and even surveys, onboarding surveys, exit surveys, and other simple types of forms. Again, the idea is to have this information within the context of your day-to-day activity, day-to-day works. Now let's look at the base templates first. These are the different base templates that are available within UpRaise: self and manager review, confidential review, survey, 360-degree review, right? Obviously, the use cases for them are pretty much self-explanatory, but I would want to call out a few things here. Now, when you're doing this traditional performance review, when you're trying to fill out the form, say for your direct report, if you have gathered the continuous feedback over the period of entire year, you will see that as a reference point. At the same time, any Jira tasks, any Jira tickets that the individual has worked on, you'll also see that as a reference when you're filling out that form. You can already try to visualize how impactful that is going to be. You know, that context, you're not starting from scratch. There is reason why the performance appraisal processes are notorious for taking up so much time in any large organization, because majority of the times intended audience starts from scratch. Whereas when it comes to the concept of agile performance management, this is not really the first step. Rather, this is the last step in the cycle, after which you begin again, right? So by the time you start filling out the form, you have already gathered a lot of data points that you wanted to talk about with the individual. Now, there are key takeaways as far as the entire agile performance management methodology is concerned. First is, of course, agility is important, not just in your project execution, but managing performance as well, right? That's the reason why OKRs are making so much noise. It's important to remain agile in the context of changing business landscapes. To make rapid course corrections, I'm talking about the second takeaway here. To make rapid course corrections and tactical shifts, rely on informed decisions than just gut feeling. Now, this may sound like a very obvious takeaway or very generic takeaway, but let me elaborate a little. Now, when it comes to gathering the performance management data, right? If you were to follow the traditional philosophy, the traditional methodology, you wouldn't actually gather much of that data during the course of the year. You would gather that data in bulk towards end of the year when the actual process happens. Whereas if you're doing it via the agile performance management philosophy, you're gathering that data on an ongoing basis. You can have quarterly checks, you can have semi-annual checks, you can have annual checks as well. But what that does is, you at any point in time, you always have access to the relevant data, to the relevant information, right? So the course corrections can happen anytime. if something does not make sense, if an objective does not make sense in the current business environment, you can immediately abandon it rather than still trying to complete it because it was supposed to get completed throughout the year, right? So these are the course corrections that I'm referring to. The third takeaway is informal and candid conversations do play as much, if not more, important role in team building as well as formal performance reviews. And this is one of the key areas where we hear from our customers, especially the HR folks who reach out and ask us, is it possible in UpRaise to somehow help individuals have discussions with each other? You know, the continuous feedback aspect that I initially referred to. That's another important takeaway. And the final one is performance management impacts not only the employees, but the goals of an entire organization. Now, going back a few slides, you'll recall I had showed you the hierarchy of goals. The company objectives were lying at the top, followed by team objectives and then individual objectives. If you were to look at the goal setting aspect traditionally, you would worry only about the individual goals. But in case of agile performance management, you are looking at the individual goals, yes, but with the colored lens that tells you that the individual goals are definitely going to have either positive or negative impact on the team as well as company level objective. That's why we say performance management impacts not only the individuals or employees, but the entire organization. And that brings me to my Q&A slides. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them up now. Mithila? Mithila, are you here? Let me just see if there are any questions.
Just a second. Yeah. Till Mithila joins. Yeah.
Yeah, the first question we've got, does OKR be implemented for small organizations?
Right. I think I already answered that question when I talked about Google, right? I said Google implemented OKRs when they were of size 40. There were 30 to 40 people when the first time around OKRs were implemented at Google. So there is no reason why OKRs will not work for small organization. In fact, we have seen a lot of organizations that are essentially startups as small as 8 to 10 people implement OKRs, but it definitely takes a lot of perseverance, tenacity to ensure the process gets implemented, because the process itself takes at least a couple of quarters to be ironed out before you can completely say, okay, now we have an OKR implemented culture.
Okay. We have another question. Should every team set moonshot goals?
Okay. This is a very interesting question that we hear even from our customers. While it may sound very enticing to set up moonshot goals, it does not make sense for each and every team across the planet to set up moonshot goals. At the end of the day, not every team is going to be Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, or whatever, right? So you can set up moonshot goals whenever there is a need, whenever it makes sense, but OKR framework should not be restricted to talk about only the moonshot goals. It's much broader than just the moonshot goals. I see another question in here in the chat box. So I'll just read out the question. at the end of the day, the company wants to evaluate employees with a 5-point scale. So whether it's OKRs or any other philosophy, will the employer still evaluate them on scale? Very interesting question. Again, there are going to be two schools of thoughts. If you read the material on the internet, if you talk with experts, again, there are going to be two thought processes. One says OKRs should not be linked to your performance appraisal or rating process in any case. That may lead to sandbagging. And the other school of thought says that shouldn't necessarily be the case. You should put across some checks and balances to ensure there is no sandbagging, and at the same time, allot some percentage of weightage in your 5-point scale for the OKRs as well. The evaluation part is always going to be there, but it need not be limited to OKRs. There are going to be competencies that you would want the employee to be assessed about. You would want the individual to show some kind of growth pattern that's not necessarily associated with OKRs, because when it comes to OKRs, primarily the OKRs are, in a way aligned to the team and organizational objectives. There are always going to be some individual level objectives as well, but primary driver for those individual objectives is always going to be company and team level objectives. In fact, we come across a lot of companies that stay away from implementing OKRs at the individual level. They only have company and group level OKRs. So the short answer is going to be the process for performance evaluation can take into account some of the OKRs, but there has to be some limitation on how much of weightage they deserve in the entire process, because the overall development spectrum of an individual is more than just the OKRs. Any other question?
But just one last question. Should the OKRs influence the performance rating?
Right. I think I partially answered this in the last question that was there about the 5-point scale. So the answer would remain same. It depends on a lot of things. First and foremost, it depends on your organizational culture. For example, if you are in the process of implementing OKRs for the first time, we will strongly recommend stay away from linking OKRs with your performance ratings. That would essentially add to the entire resistance. But if you are well into the implementation phase, you are now confident that entire organization has bought in the concept of OKRs, then feel free to go ahead and experiment with that process a little bit. There is no one answer that's going to be suitable for every team that's out there. So I guess that was the last question, Mithila, right?
Yes, that was the last one.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for being a part of this discussion about raising the bar for employee success. Thanks again for making the entire JiraCon event exciting. And I guess we have the closing next steps in the next few minutes. Thank you.